Hi, I'm Laurie Dobson. This is, I can call it Island Update. It's the sort of thing I've been doing lately since March, and talking about COVID, talking about issues of living with it. And so today is July 31st, tomorrow's August 1st. We'll have been living with this thing March, April, May, June, July. We're going into our 6th month dealing with this virus, and I am 2020. So I'm doing this video today because I have learned some things that I didn't know, and I still don't know for a fact because I haven't seen the studies and the tests. And I think a lot of us have been doing that, thinking that we have friends that have solid information, people we trust to have valid ideas and thoughts, and working a lot on reputation and relying on others that we value. And as a result, I think that being on Facebook, we have tried to understand all these things with the virus from a point of view of as much science as we get a hold of, keeping our minds open so we're not relying on a fear factor to drive us into certain behavior patterns. And those of us who are independent thinkers, trying not to just instantly jump to whatever the herd sort of mentality tells us we have to accept, have kind of gone out on a stringer or two from time to time trying to understand this thing. And it's not that we resist or resent those who are choosing the standard recommended procedure from, liberal Democrats, or non-extremists or far right, far left people. I self-identify as far left, so I would normally, listen to those people. But early on when I started questioning either side or the other of the mask controversy, I got some blowback on both sides from people on both sides saying they would unfriend me, a member of my family. And it kind of builds a resentment when you're trying to do something to just understand a situation. Are masks the right thing? Is a vaccine the right thing? Are we putting ourselves at risk with certain procedures, with certain types of behaviors? What does herd mentality require from us, to really be effective? And all the while, I've also fallen into the thinking that there's certain people out there, certain individuals that have been, we're told are working at odds and contrary to our best interests, such as, either or they are or they're not, such as Dr. Fauci or Bill Gates or some of these other people. There was a woman, Dr. Stella Emanuel, who got 20 million hits. People were so interested in her, what she said was practical knowledge, practical information that hydroxychloroquine was good. And people such as RFK Jr., and other people who I admire for their stand on things. So I think anybody that's done any research at all has gotten to a conclusion that they're being thoroughly confused and demoralized by the effort to just try to get around it, to the point of view of understanding what we can do. That's the most effective thing. When we have older parents, is the social isolation versus the detriment to their morale and the mental health. Is it truly an issue that we should be isolating certain pockets of the population that aren't in cluster zones, which I'm learning it's a peculiar situation to certain clusters that can be sort of segregated from others based on certain types of susceptibility. I've learned that today, actually, I learned from talking to somebody who has given me another viewpoint to come from on these things that it has been a big shift to me, for me, to ask the questions from someone who has, okay, this is a person I know from, that has worked in Seattle with Bill Gates and Foundation, and has a knowledge of some information, and has availed himself to some of it, and has really given me a chance to think things through. And his point of view is that nothing good can come from Facebook one way or another, which I think is kind of an interesting, after having so much of my aggravation and grief comes from dealing with Facebook. I wonder if Facebook in itself is just, it's like a media organization. You know, they thrive on controversy and they thrive on chaos. You know, just like our country, our government, our way of staying in power and staying funded throughout the world, to a large extent, is based on destabilizing other elements. So I don't think that I want to endorse or support any organization that works to destabilize my well-being or those of my, the common good. It works against the common good. So since that's the case, I've acquired a strong skepticism of certain public figures. At one time, like a lot of people in April, when we were so frightened, Governor Cuomo seemed to be the one we all just leaned on, like the father figure, and he took that role. And so now we've been learning things about treatments that are not useful, such as the ventilators not being as useful. Supplemental oxygen is a good thing. Such strong forces for supporting the idea of hydroxychloroquine and zinc and zithromycin. I think that's Zithromax, excuse me. Therapies, not too much, but in the right amounts early on. Many voices I've heard supporting that, and yet that's not something that's being supported mainstream. And is that because it's in contention with other drugs that can make money, like remdesivir, which is going to be very expensive when it gets out there. The whole idea of the vaccines being helpful, but they've been cranking them out. I learned from this person that that the reason that they're coming out much quicker now is because than they had originally said. Blix said, I think her name was Blix, said a year and a half, but it's because there's been such a huge effort that it's put it forward more, and not having animal trials makes it more risky, but it seems to be heading forward. And that this gentleman said that the nature of the vaccine is, and he's done simulations and numbers, and he understands the science and the studies to understand that the behavior patterns of this are, like a cold. It can continue. It won't necessarily fall off. It can ebb in certain ways. It has already. The lethality is low, potentially just 1.2 fatality, which is low, but the infection rate is high. It can kill. 60% of cases are asymptomatic or mild, but when it does hit, it hits hard. And there's two strains, one from Europe, another from China, apparently harder hit with the Europe variety of it. And the idea of herd immunity with the R naught factor. So in other words, it's all about, it's our behavior that predicts or predicts the outcome of herd immunity. That I'd heard a study from Glasgow saying that when you reach 20% immunity, that's where the herd immunity kicked in. And he said what it's based on is that let me see if I can regroup. It's a matter of behaviors, so there's either the social isolation or the mask to prevent an infected person from actively, it's a barrier, and social isolation to an extent, but outside it's aerosolized so quickly that it is really no big problem, and which is why in the protests outside in New York, which has now pretty much attained herd immunity, that the protests are that it aerosolized in the air, so it didn't change there's hardly a blip on the screen of increase with all the people outside protesting, but it's interior, it's inside, and it's in a sustained way without a barrier. So that's a herd immunity is the three things to help it are to do a physical barrier, or not help it, but the three things that affect it are a social barrier, a barrier to the infection, a vaccine, or death. So those are the things that affect it the most. The weird thing about Vietnam with a 20 million population and 0 deaths may have something to do with the fact that they're a country that has a lot of bats, and apparently this is bat kind of, maybe there's a certain bat resistance that they have, some sort of immunity in that regard. And then there's also Taiwan, which has 20 to 30 million. They've only had 10 million deaths, but their idea of quarantine is extremely rigid beyond what we can even imagine. Rigid quarantine means you're separated from everybody and everything, and you're on a cot in the middle of nowhere till you test negative. So we haven't gone to any lengths of extremes like that, and early on enough to prevent the barrier. And the way he was describing it sounds like something that I was familiar with the Zika virus down in the tropics, where there's a sort of a cycle where it saturates. Everybody either has it or has had it. So the mosquito biting a new person, that person is immune, so the mosquito dies without having transmitted it. So this virus is kind of like, he said it's like a football team. You have, say, 60 peacekeepers in the center, and those people are doing active resistance for the virus to travel to the other side of the field. And based on, say, the mask wearing actually prevents an ill person from actively, as actively passing it along. So it's thwarted. So the R naught factor gets thinned down. So say if one person has it, they infect 5 others, it's an R factor of 5, R naught, whatever. And then if that person had 2 other people infected, and say they stayed in the basement, nothing happened, so their R factor was 0, or R naught factor, I don't know what it's called. Anyway, so then you average it out, and then the average goes along successively, and the lower the average, it's not that the virus is getting weaker, but its ability to transmit is reduced and reduced and reduced. So it's the strongest argument I've heard so far to wearing masks. They're saying that if it's not for everybody to wear a mask, but if you are sick, the best chance of reducing this virus is to not transmit it, because the droplets would drop more if you're in contact with other people. But if we only had sick people wearing them, they'd be ostracized, in addition to being sick. And he had said that it's really out of consideration for those that are sick to make it a practice for everybody. And the other thing is that even though the temperature, raising your temperature and your and headaches are the indicator, the classic indicator, you are the most contagious 24 hours after you're contaminated or infected, and you don't really present for at least 3 days after that. So you're most contagious when you have the least amount of show of your symptoms, similar to a cold. And so wearing a mask in that early phase, where you don't have symptoms showing, or you may not have symptoms at all. 60% of cases are mild or no symptoms presenting. So we can't really, similar to a cold. So, you may or you may not present with the symptoms. Going on 15 minutes here, I learned a lot. I'm going to be looking at Johns Hopkins information. University of Minnesota has some stuff. Some of the stuff on the CDC, some things from New York Times at least they don't charge you for script. If you're looking up COVID information, they don't charge it as a subscription. And it doesn't tally up to, they only allow you so much looking per month on those articles. And then there's a simulated information that I'm going to be pressing to get more information about as well. I'm still leery of, I did ask, I said, the whole thing about vaccines and Bill Gates, I mean, if you had any knowledge of course that was a hoax, the whole thing about people getting a strain of, inoculated with a identifying marking of some sort, or some sort of injected with something along with a vaccine to be required before travel is allowed. He said, well, the travel currently is not allowed anyway, but he didn't know of anything that was coming down the pike that would be tying personal liberties to taking the vaccine. But he just say the first million, there's going to be 1 million made free to the public. The government is probably going to be doing this first come, first serve. And when they're gone, they're gone. And then I guess Moderna is being appealed to not have high expense on their drugs. Gates is not making anything, although he'd own patents, and those are, patents are handy things to have. So I don't have all the answers, but after hearing some of this information and judging the discussion that I had with the person, the quality of the information and is forthcoming, and it just seemed to be on the level, I am reassessing my stand on masks, on the efficacy of them, and I'm going to be a little more open to the idea of vaccines than I have been. I don't have to be instantly in the camp of hydroxychloroquine. I'm not for or against it until I get really convinced either way. I don't have to be. I don't think we should discount it or try to render people who believe certain things as ludicrous. I think probably one of the worst things that the middle ground, libs have done is create a factionalized, there's the far right and the far left, and the only sane ones are themselves. When you listen to certain algorithms and certain things on Facebook, people that you respect, people that are trying really hard to understand this thing, everybody has a different framework for understanding this and different experiences. People that I know that have had bad experiences with corruption in nursing homes, versus other people that think, okay, well, other things. So the whole thing is a big mess. The vaccine thing is a mess. He readily agreed on that too. But I'm going to keep looking, and I am going to continue to have an open mind. And I don't care who unfriends me as a result of it, because I think we've got to come at it with fresh eyes every day and just not let the misinformation accumulate to the point where we're too demoralized to keep trying to understand, and just being at peace with what we don't know, taking the courageous actions when we do know what to do, which is what I'm trying to do now, is open up and reveal that I've had some reconsideration of my positions and understandings, and as I should. I shouldn't be fixed on opinions just because it's built up to a point of calcification of thought. That's not truth. That's just laziness and irresponsibility and cowardice. So I'm not going to do that either. I'm going to stay true to myself. I'm going to listen to some good voices out there that are encouraging people to keep their wholeness and their sanity and their understanding of who they are, and to work with themselves and all those understandings to stay strong and centered. I'm going to work really hard on keeping my sleep patterns in good shape and getting happiness in my life and lots of love. And I wish the same for everybody out there. I'm going to quit it here at 20 minutes. Have a great day. Bye, guys.